Hello friends, today I'm going to tell you about a sci-fi action movie called Boss Level. Like and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. Roy Palver, a former Special Forces soldier, falls into an endless time loop for the 139th time. In every attempt to get out, his life is doomed to perish at the hands of unknown killers, and all the events are repeated over and over again. Roy diligently studies all the movements of his opponent and knows perfectly well the trajectory of each bullet fired from a machine gun. However, on the 22nd attempt, he finally manages to outwit fate. At the moment when the helicopter crashes into his house, Roy accurately jumps out of the window and lands in the back of a passing truck. Obsessed with ending the endless time loop, Roy steals a car and begins a chase. According to his plan, a bus should crash into the killer's car, but he could not determine the exact time, which is why he crashed into the bus himself. Each subsequent attempt brings Roy more and more experience and skill in survival, but at the same time he faces new killers. Despite all his efforts to change the outcome of events, death always overtakes him. His hope is a girl named Gemma, who works for a top-secret organization, but the colonel says that she has already died as a result of an accident. At this time, the conversation is interrupted by two brothers, and now Roy intends to find out what happened to his wife. It all starts with another chase, after which Roy comes to Jake and asks for 2 bottles. At the same time, Dave starts talking about terrorist attacks, but Roy, already tipsy, starts talking about all his deaths, which is why everyone just starts laughing. But all this was for the sake of a short break, because every day at the same time he is killed and he has never managed to hold out longer. Fast forward to a day ago, when the time loop has not yet started to operate. Roy comes to his wife. She asks why his phone doesn't work. Roy hands over his resume to the Delta Squad and starts asking everything he's interested in. He didn't know that there was wiretapping everywhere, which the colonel is listening to right now. Gemma says that this machine is capable of destroying space and time. In addition, it can erase everything in this world if it is used carelessly. After these words, the head of the guard goes to them. Well, Roy asks to tell his son about him. Gemma says there's no point in that because he's more interested in fighting than living with them. At this time, Brett enters and says that they have no seats right now, and the colonel is already waiting for Gemma. As soon as he leaves, Gemma says that there really are no places in the Delta Department. She has a place, and this mission is super secret. The colonel says that there is something in his resume and asks Brett to put surveillance on Roy, and as soon as he starts interfering, he will need to be eliminated. At this time, Gemma cuts off a piece of hair and asks Roy to change, and then tells him the word Osiris several times. The colonel asks Gemma why there were delays in work and why she violates security protocols. Then he tells his story and says that he is one of those who would rather kill a person than an animal. Sometimes an act of aggression is an act of love. In the late afternoon, Roy, as always, is sitting at the bar. One of the girls tells him that he still loves someone. Then Gemma calls him. She says she needs to take drastic measures, and if something happens, he should do what he has to. But she didn't know that their conversation was being tapped again, which is why the colonel orders to find her. That's how the Roy time loop started. Already on the 141st attempt, he is trying to understand what Osiris means. This leads him to a gaming club, and sitting on a bench, he tries to understand something, to find at least some clue. In the book, he suddenly notices a congratulation from Gemma, which ends with the phrase, "Time waits for no one." Then he notices his son. He tries to catch up with him, which leads him to a hall with computers. Roy says you can't skip school. He also asks his son what he bought from that guy. It turned out to be a card RPG. After that, they go out to eat sushi together. When Roy walks next to the girl, her computer starts to fail. On the street, he looks at the time, and it turns out that he has already lived 3 minutes longer than usual. It remains only to understand how it happened. He understands that all this time he was on the surface, which is why the beacon easily transmitted data about him. As soon as he went underground, the signal was interrupted. But the killers are already here. He grabs his son so that he will not be killed, and before he dies, he confesses that he is the father. In the new time loop, he tries to find out how they are tracking him, but does not get an exact answer. Because of this, Roy comes to Jake's cafe, where they ask Dave where the beacons can be, and they come up with the idea that the beacon should be in the tooth. He immediately remembers the doctor's appointment, where the Colonel's guard was also present. He asks Jake to find a pair of pliers to find the right tooth. He pulls out each of them and shows them in turn to Dave, who notices a suspicious tooth. But the killer comes and begins the 145th attempt. He finds out from the girl that it was Brett who ordered the wiretap. Then he returns to the cafe and pulls out a tracker, which he now uses as bait. Soon, Roy kills the first killer named Pam, because now he is a hunter himself. After eliminating absolutely everyone, Roy takes the phone and tells Brett that he is coming for him. He decides to ram the wall, but this takes him to the 146th attempt. Now he manages to fly over the wall and blow up the car, after which a new attempt begins. This time he got the idea to change into Roy number 2 and get inside, which he easily does. In the elevator, he needs to use the card to move on, but by this time it is no longer working, which is why the 148th attempt begins. Only on the 150th attempt does he manage to get into the Colonel's office, where Guan Yin is already waiting for him inside. Roy remembers a scene from the movie Indiana Jones, where the enemy came out against a gun and then immediately died. He thought the same thing would happen to him, but he no longer has bullets. A new challenge begins, to defeat Guan Yin, who seems impossible to shoot. On one of the attempts, a colonel comes to him and personally kills him. During the conversation, he managed to find out what Osiris is. Gemma managed to start the flywheel, which is why Roy became Osiris. She wants Roy to stop the colonel, and she believes that he will succeed. In a cafe, he asks to teach him how to use a katana, but the woman says that they will only have a day to learn. She didn't know that this day could go on forever. It took him 50 attempts to not only fight back, but also defeat Guan Yin. Meanwhile, a guard runs out who also dies. Roy eventually defeats Colonel Clive Ventor, and then he immediately rushes back to protect his son. But it's too late. After that, the end of the world begins, because of which he falls into depression, but eventually pulls himself together and goes to his son. He decides to stay with his son, and then he begins to realize that he has been doing something wrong all this time. He realizes that his happiness has always been with him, but every time everything is interrupted by the explosion of the time machine. In one attempt, the son says that Gemma called him at 7:03, and this is the time when Roy woke up. He understands that he still has a chance to save her. He manages to get into the center of the lab. Before eliminating the enemies, he notices the time of the kill, 7:14. That means he has 10 whole minutes to save her. He grabs a helicopter and goes to the right place. On the cameras, Roy sees that the killers are walking through one corridor and decides to shoot them with a machine gun. Exactly 1 minute before Gemma's death, he bursts into the office. Gemma asks how many attempts he's had, and Roy replies that it's only one. Gemma says that Roy needs to get into the time machine, and only then, in theory, the time loop will stop. Roy says goodbye to Gemma and goes inside the time machine, hoping to finally stop the series of these crazy events. Thank you for watching this video.